Welcome to the Teapot Reads. My name's Sam. I'm the Teapot. This is what I am currently reading, and I am so happy to see you today. Hello and welcome. Welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if this is your first time here. Please ignore the sound of the fan in the background. It is either the fan or other, even more annoying noises. I think you should be able to hear me fine based off of previous tests I did with the fan in the background. It's almost Christmas. I love Christmas so much. I'm not a super religious person. In fact, I am not a religious person, but it is still my favorite holiday. I just love everything about this season. As you've probably been able to tell by the type of videos going up on this channel lately, I am really launching into the holiday and the Christmas season with just so much glee and abandon. But one thing I love doing is I love gifting some of my favorite books that I've read throughout the year to people that I'm close with. I love doing it because it's kind of like sharing a piece of me. Books are obviously a major part of my existence, and I love being able to sort of narrow it down, not just to favorite books and books I loved this year, but books that I would consider safe to gift to someone who doesn't need to know the deep weirdness that is what I'm reading. So these are like safe bet gifting books in my opinion. And I just kind of wanted to really quickly go through them and share them with you, partly as like a recommendation, like here is a good like gifting idea. Like this is a book that you might want to consider gifting, or a book you might want to consider reading. Like I said, these are some of my favorites, but they are by no means my favorites of the year. You'll see that video, if it hasn't already posted, soon enough, because my favorites, some of my favorites, did not even make it onto this list because I was like, I don't need to share that with family, actually. They don't need to know what I'm reading. So without further ado, we're just going to get into it. It's going to be a really quick video. So yeah, first of all, I have Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is sort of a gothic mystery fantasy about the library, the library. I don't know why, I just couldn't remember. The cemetery of forgotten books. Our protagonist finds one of those books called The Shadow of the Wind, and it kind of leads him on a hunt for the author, especially considering, or I guess the author's past, especially considering someone is taking the time to destroy all of the author's books. Really twisty, really good, really love the atmosphere, and I also think that it's the perfect book to give someone who likes mysteries, because it may not it is a classic, I would say, at this point, but it may not necessarily be something they've picked up already, because it's not typically shelved in the mystery section. I typically see it shelved either in fiction or in fantasy for some reason, which I think is just not correct. It's also super immersive, so it's someone who is willing to kind of sit down and read for a while. I think it's also a safe bet if you don't know too much about what that person likes in books. Mysteries tend to be a really go-to for a lot of newer or readers who just don't read a lot. And this one is definitely got that appeal to it as well, and it has sort of a cinematic quality. So this is sort of, I think, a really safe bet across the board. The next book I'm gifting is Court of Miracles by Kester Grant. This is sort of a retelling and reimagining of Les Miserables. It is not very close. It sort of just like has nods to Les Mis quite a bit and has characters named after them. This is a really cool, really fun book. I enjoyed this so much. I don't know why it didn't pick up more steam when it came out, but I absolutely loved it. So this one, I would say, is a really good gift. Do not give it to people who love Les Mis. I will say that right now, because every negative review I've seen about this book is people who love Les Mis saying that they could not stand it. Okay, so diehard Les Mis fans, do not give it to them. However, I think it's a really safe bet for anyone who is a little bit more of a lighter reader, as well as someone who's maybe read quite a few books, and maybe is really familiar with YA as a genre, and just has read everything major on the lists. This one is not super well known. I think that's a shame, but I think that's the truth, and I think that it would make it a really good gift if you're like, they've probably read or own this book. They probably don't have this one. I think this is a great choice. Next we have Emma by Jane Austen. I read Emma early this year, I think, and I really loved it. My favorite is still Pride and Prejudice, but this is really a fantastic book. Yes, it is a classic, so definitely narrows down the type of reader you're giving it to. And Emma Woodhouse is not necessarily a very likable character. She is handsome and clever and rich, but she's not very nice or likable necessarily all the time. But Emma is such a fun character. This book is such a fun book, and the romance is pretty solid, even though it's a weird age gap thing. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. We ignore it. We say it's a product of its time, even though it's creepy. I'm gifting this to someone who reads, I think, a fair bit of nonfiction more than anything else, but I don't read nonfiction, so I couldn't really recommend anything. And I think that it's, again, a classic that maybe you've heard about, maybe you've seen the film, but you may not have read the book. And the book is really quite good, so I strongly recommend this one. And I'm gifting it, to someone who is probably borderline familiar with Jane Austen, but I don't think would have read Emma, even though it's a fairly famous book. These next two, because I'll talk about them together. These next two books are not risky clicks, but I feel very much like I'm sharing a piece of my soul in these that I'm not necessarily sharing in the rest of the books, because they are some of my favorite books of the year. And I do think that they're a little bit of a harder sell for the people I'm gifting them to, but I just think they're so fantastic and safe enough to gift. We have Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. Absolutely adored, obsessed. Will not shut up about this book. It's fantastic. I am not gifting Winter's Orbit because, as much as I like Winter's Orbit, it is a romance first, a rom-com type story first, a relationship first, and then a plot. This is a plot first and a relationship second. And I think that this one also subverts a lot of really classic science fiction tropes that Winter's Orbit does not necessarily do. And I think it stands alone very well. I don't think you need to read Winter's Orbit to read Ocean's Echo, although I would say if you're interested in them both, start with Winter's Orbit, because I feel like Winter's Orbit would be a letdown if you read this first. Ocean's Echo is about psychic spacefarers and ancient alien technology and consent. I'm gifting this to someone who is very familiar with really classic science fiction tropes and classic science fiction books and TV and movies. I think that it does a really good job of subverting that and really fulfills a lot of those really reasons you might love science fiction, while also doing something really new with them. And I just think that it is a really cool world that's built, and the angst is off the chart. So this is also another really good one if you know someone who really likes angsty stories like me. It has everything you could want. And then the other sort of risky one is Gideon the Ninth, but how could I not gift this? Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir has become easily one of my favorite books of all time. It is about, the tagline everyone uses is lesbian necromancers in space. And while that's true, I think a better pitch for it is actually locked room mystery in space, because something is killing people. It's also, maybe not locked room, it's like one of us is the killer mystery in space. Haunted space station. And I think that is a much better pitch for it, especially if you're giving it to someone who may not necessarily be drawn to something that's pitched as lesbian necromancers in space. Like, that's what it is too. Or if you read the letter Tamsin wrote for Illumicrate, it is about how a jock and a nerd can't be friends. That is also true, but I think there are so many ways to describe this book, and one I'm really going with is that one I mentioned, mystery thriller aspect. It's got a little bit of horror elements, and I think it's good for someone who does like horror type books, someone who likes mysteries, and someone who likes, obviously, science fiction, although I would say it skews a little closer to fantasy. So I am actually giving it to a fantasy reader. I am gifting it to someone who actually likes sort of harder to read novels sometimes. They're a fan of N.K. Jemisin, so I think that Tamsin Muir's writing is not going to throw them too much for a loop, and I think they will really enjoy this. Next, I have A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. Absolutely adored this book. I wish more people were reading and talking about it, because it really is fantastic. It is a boarding school mystery dark academia book, and I think dark academia really is the key here. I'm gifting it to someone who I think would really appreciate the aesthetic if they're not already into it. I also think because it's a YA, it's a much lighter read, and you can kind of, if you're not a big reader, it's very palatable and it's very quick moving, so it will engage you the entire time. The atmosphere is also very heady and addictive, and I think that the ending is really going to please not necessarily just YA readers, but readers across the board. It's definitely the sort of cross age sort of read. It's not necessarily the strongest book I read this year, but it was definitely one of the most entertaining, and I'm kind of gifting it on those premises. Babel by R.F. Kuang. I feel like this is a book everyone should read, but I think specifically it is a book that people who are more academically inclined should read, because in a lot of ways it feels more like an essay being written than a novel. Not to say that it is a bad novel, because I did really enjoy this book. If you haven't heard of Babel, it is it's about colonialism and taking down empire, or attempting to, and being a product of empire even when you're othered, and how language controls, and there's a little bit of magic thrown in. I don't think it is a fantasy book, but I'm not gifting it sort of under the guise of a fantasy book. I'm gifting it under the guise of, this is an important piece of literature. And so I'm gifting it to someone who I think would appreciate the hefty tome nature of it, and also like a little bit of fantasy sprinkled into like historical stories. Then, and I'm not holding it up because I literally just finished putting it away and it is deep in the manga stack, but I'm gifting Witch Hat Atelier. This is easy to gift because it's a manga, and I'm giving it to someone who likes manga and doesn't necessarily read in this genre of manga, but I'm also think it would be a really good gift as like a middle grade book if you're looking to someone who's a little younger and is just starting to read manga and maybe branching out into it, or someone who really likes whimsical or Studio Ghibli. I think Witch Hat Atelier is a super perfect book to give to a lot of different people that you know. Then we have Anne of Green Gables by Ella Montgomery. I'm actually going to give this to a rather young child, so I might end up getting an abridged version, because the full version is not necessarily the most entertaining when you're that young, but there are some really cute abridged versions, so that's probably what I'm going with. Anne is a classic. If you haven't noticed, I've been doing Anne of Green Gables reading vlog series, so it's kind of taken over my life temporarily. And I did really enjoy Anne. I think it's really good. It's definitely more of a moralizing novel than I necessarily like to give to children, but it's fun. Anne's a great character, and you can't just like give book 2. That's a bit odd. So yeah, I'll probably be giving an abridgment of book 1. Anne is a super easy gift to give. I think it's a really good children's classic. I think you really can't go wrong with that, and even adults could enjoy it. And then the final book I'm gifting is the Brambley Hedge complete collection. I don't know if this edition is actually still available to purchase, because when I got it there weren't very many in the warehouse, so I might be getting them a different edition, but I'm giving this to children, very young children, so obviously they can't even read it, but it's really cute. The art is glorious, and I think it's sort of a keepsake treasure that they will be able to hold on to for a while. So those are the books I am gifting this year. I'm actually probably going to end up gifting even more than these books, but these are like favorite books that I thought were safe bets to gift, and the kind of people that I think, if you're looking to kind of skew towards, might be good, decent gift recommendations. I don't know. This is just a really quick, fun video I like to do, and if you're someone who I gift books to, I really hope you did not watch this video, but I think that I concealed who you each were for the most part, except maybe those last two. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you like this content and you want to see more, definitely consider subscribing, and if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. It means the world to me. If you are somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable, and most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye!